jump into this deep dive. We're taking a really close look at, the state of youth sports today.
Yeah.
And we're drawing on insights from a specific source, an article from the IYCA, which feels very grounded in research.
Yeah.
It gives a pretty clear picture, I think, of where things are and maybe where the opportunities for change lie.
That's right. And youth sports, well, for so long we've thought of them as these kind of essential life classrooms, haven't we? Teaching so much more than just, how to kick a ball.
Leadership, teamwork.
Yeah, perseverance, dealing with failure, all of those lessons kids hopefully carry with them.
Absolutely. But this source, it makes a really compelling case that the whole landscape has, well, fundamentally shifted. It suggests that the things we value most, that joy, that healthy development, they're facing some pretty serious challenges right now.
And that's our goal here, isn't it? To really unpack those specific science-backed challenges that this IYCA article highlights. What are they actually signaling for the future of how kids experience sport?
Yeah, and what I find interesting is the perspective they bring. They don't just list, problems. They frame these things as signals,
Right.
like opportunities to maybe pause, reflect, maybe rethink how we're doing things, and ultimately shift our focus a bit.
It's about acknowledging the reality on the ground. And yeah, the source really zeroes in on 5 critical realities they see shaping youth sports.
Okay, so let's dive into that first one.
Let's do it.
So the first challenge this source lays out is called early specialization, a shortcut with hidden costs. What exactly are they getting at there?
Well, this is a trend that's become incredibly common, hasn't it? We see kids being, well, steered, maybe pushed, into focusing on just one sport, sometimes really young, like age 8 or 9.
Wow.
And the belief driving it, according to the article, is this idea that you have to specialize early, specialize intensely if you want any shot at becoming, elite.
But the research they point to seems to, well, strongly contradict that whole idea.
It absolutely does. The data they highlight links early specialization pretty directly to much higher rates of overuse injuries and also burnout in young athletes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they cite a widely referenced study. I think it was Janthi and colleagues back in 2015. It found that kids who specialized early were, get this, 70% more likely to suffer serious overuse injuries compared to kids playing multiple sports.
Wow, 70% for serious injuries. That's huge.
It is huge, a massive difference.
So, okay, beyond the physical toll,
Mhm.
what other downsides does the source mention?
Well, they point out it narrows what they call a child's movement vocabulary, sort of limits the different ways their body learns to move and adapt. You get that variety playing different things.
Right.
And it also restricts their exposure, different coaching styles, different kinds of team dynamics, even just different kids you meet playing different sports.
So conversely then, are there clear benefits to maybe holding off on specializing? What does the research the article talks about suggest?
Precisely.
Okay.
Yeah, the research actually shows that athletes who wait maybe until later adolescence to really focus on one sport, they're often more likely to have long-term success and just satisfaction,
Oh.
both in their sport and, frankly, just in life generally. Playing multiple sports builds adaptability, it fosters creativity, leads to broader physical literacy, and can actually result in better performance down the line and fewer mental health challenges, too.
Okay, so when the source talks about the shift needed here, what's the call to action? What are they saying needs to change?
They're really calling for us to recognize that sport, for kids anyway, at its core should be this space for curiosity, right? For experimentation, for growth. And when that whole process of exploration gets replaced by intense early pressure and this narrow focus on immediate results, well, the article argues we're not just sucking the joy out of it, we're actually undermining the long-term development that sport could offer.
Yeah, that really does lead us straight into the next big challenge they talk about. They call it adultification, where fun goes to die. What's the heart of this problem?
It's basically how much youth sports have started looking like, well, the pros, like miniature adult leagues.
Right.
The article gives examples we all see, branded uniforms, constant travel tournaments, national rankings for little kids, even live streaming games.
So the kids must feel like they're constantly under a microscope,
Yeah.
always being evaluated.
Exactly. The pressure becomes immense, and they feel like they're performing, rather than just playing for the fun of it. And the article points to some pretty striking data here. They cite the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons, noting that by age 13, nearly 70% of kids drop out of organized sports.
70% quitting by 13. That number is just staggering. It's huge.
It really is.
And what does the source say is the main reason, the primary driver behind that dropout rate?
The number one reason, stated really clearly in the article, is simply it stopped being fun.
It sounds so basic, but that's incredibly powerful, isn't it?
Mm.
The article isn't saying fun is just like a nice little extra.
Not at all. They really emphasize that fun isn't optional. It's the engine. It's the absolute core driver of a kid's motivation and why they stick with something.
Okay.
And when the focus shifts entirely to outcome, wins, stats where you rank over just the process of playing, practicing, learning, well, we lose that chance to build deep, lasting passion and persistence, creativity too.
And it must send a pretty tough message to the kids themselves about their value.
It absolutely does. It can subtly, or maybe not so subtly, communicate that their worth is tied only to their performance, their stats, their wins,
Yeah.
instead of their effort, their growth, their character, or just the simple enjoyment they get from playing.
So what's the counter move? What's the shift that the source is advocating for here?
More play, plain and simple. More laughter, more unstructured time, maybe even time where the coach just steps back.
Yeah.
Letting kids just reconnect with why they fell in love with the game in the first place. Fun isn't a distraction from development. The article really argues it's the fuel. It's what keeps them engaged and growing long term.
But if fun is the fuel, then who's responsible for actually creating that environment, for making sure development is really the priority? Which brings us to the third challenge. Coach training gaps development isn't one size fits all.
Yeah, the coach is, well, probably the most influential adult in a young athlete's sports life.
Okay.
Yet, the article points out this really significant gap. A surprising number of youth coaches just don't have formal training in child development or effective communication specifically for kids, or even understanding physical literacy at different ages.
And it feels like so many youth coaches just kind of default to copying what they saw their own coaches do, maybe, or what they see on TV at the pro or college level.
That's exactly the disconnect the source highlights. An 8-year-old or even a 13-year-old, they aren't just mini adults. Their bodies, their brains, their emotional capacity, it's all still developing massively. So the way you coach them, the way you talk to them, it needs to be fundamentally different than how you'd coach adults.
And what are the consequences the source points to when coaches miss that, when that mismatch happens?
Well, the impact can be pretty serious. You're looking at increased risk of emotional harm, which can lead to burnout. It contributes to those overuse injuries we already talked about. And it can actually hold back their long-term athletic development. Kids don't just need drills. They need connection. They need a coach who sees the whole person, not just, a collection of skills or stats.
It's really not just about the X's and O's, is it? It's about how that coach talks to them after a mistake, how they help a kid separate, their performance on the field from who they are as a person.
Precisely. Coaches are in this position where they are genuinely shaping a child's identity, not just teaching them how to throw or catch. And that's why the article strongly advocates for evidence-based coaching. It shouldn't just be built on, how charismatic the coach is or whatever trend is popular online this week.
It needs to be rooted in what we actually know about how kids learn, how they develop physically and emotionally.
Exactly. Science-backed methods, grounded in developmental psychology, movement science, proven best practices for different age groups, not just guesswork.
So what happens when coaches do get that kind of real education? What's the positive outcome?
The source is really clear on this. Those coaches create safer environments, more positive environments, and ultimately more sustainable environments for young athletes. They end up building athletes who are more likely to stick with sports longer, thrive within them, and honestly thrive outside of sports too. The article even mentions the IYCA's own certification programs as an example of that kind of foundational science-backed training they think coaches need.
Got it. So the recommended shift here is really about raising the bar, elevating the standard for coaching education.
Absolutely. They argue that quality, science-rooted coach education shouldn't be optional. It should be essential, non-negotiable. We need to expect more in terms of what youth coaches know, what they do, and importantly, what they model for these kids.
Yeah?
Because when coaches really commit to developmentally appropriate, evidence-based training, well, everyone wins, especially the kids whose lives they're impacting so profoundly.
Building on that idea of seeing the whole person, the source then tackles a challenge that feels like it's gaining more and more importance. Mental well-being, pressure without support.
Yeah, sport has this amazing potential, right? It can be a powerful tool for protecting and promoting mental well-being in young people. But
There's a but.
there's a but. As the article points out, if we're not really intentional about the environment we create, it can just as easily become a major source of stress, anxiety, and kind of damaging identity pressure.
And you can totally see how the things we've already discussed, that pressure from specializing early, the adult level expectations, the constant comparison, would just pour fuel on that fire.
Exactly. And the source makes a really critical distinction here. They argue that young athletes aren't inherently soft or somehow lacking toughness. Often they are just tired.
Hmm.
They're burnt out, they're maxed out by the relentless demands that the current system often places on them.
We talk a lot about resilience, we praise toughness, but maybe we're not actually teaching or supporting kids in how to build it effectively.
That's a key point in the article. Real resilience, true toughness, it isn't built by just telling kids to suck it up or ignore how they feel.
Right.
It's nurtured. It grows in safe environments where they feel secure enough to take risks, to make mistakes, even to fail without feeling like their whole world is ending.
Okay.
And it comes from actually giving them practical tools, simple things really, like breath work, visualization techniques, skills for just regulating their emotions when things get tough.
And the article highlights something else here that maybe gets missed a lot when we talk about mental well-being in sports.
That the coaches need this too. Coaches themselves, coaching is incredibly demanding, emotionally demanding.
Yeah.
We're investing so much in these young people. You're carrying expectations, dealing with wins and losses. And honestly, many coaches were probably raised in sports cultures that taught them to just grind through and suppress emotions, not process them.
So a coach's own mental fitness, their ability to model healthy coping skills, that's fundamental.
According to the article, yes, absolutely foundational. When coaches actively practice these kinds of mental skills themselves, maybe it's just taking a breath before reacting to a bad call, or reflecting on their own stress levels, or staying grounded in why they coach, they become more effective. More trustworthy leaders for their athletes, more centered themselves, and crucially, they create those safer spaces where athletes feel genuinely seen and supported, not just yelled at.
It sounds like the article frames mental well-being less like a lecture the adults give and more like a shared human experience, a journey for everyone.
Exactly. It requires ongoing practice, ongoing attention from everyone involved, adults and athletes alike. The article argues that coach self-care isn't like self-indulgent. It's actually a vital form of leadership that shapes the whole team culture.
So what's the call for change here? What's the recommended shift in this area?
Make mental skills training and emotional literacy fundamental. Build it into the sports experience. Don't just tack it on as an extra. Build psychological safety directly into the culture of the program. The article really asserts this isn't just about making tougher athletes, it's about shaping healthier human beings overall.
Right.
Coaches need to approach emotional strength, mental recovery with the same seriousness they apply to physical conditioning. It's about fostering a culture where self-awareness, compassion, emotional regulation, these are things openly discussed and practiced by everyone, starting with the adults in charge.
Okay, finally, the source points to maybe a quieter trend, one perhaps less discussed, but they say it's deeply concerning. Coaching gender gap representation matters.
Yeah, this refers to the pretty steady decline we've seen in the number of women coaching youth sports, even while girls' participation keeps going up. The article gives some really stark data. They note back in 1972, over 90% of women's college teams were coached by women. But fast forward to today, they cite Acosta and Carpenter from 2016. That number's plummeted to only around 40%.
40%. And the source notes that based on their own observations, it's probably even lower at the youth level, right? Where most kids get their start.
That's their sense, yeah. And they make a crucial point. This isn't just about, fairness or equal opportunity in coaching jobs. It's fundamentally a developmental issue that actually impacts all the kids.
How so? How does the coach's gender impact development for everybody on the team?
Well, when a coaching staff is diverse, when it offers a range of experiences, communication styles, leadership approaches, it benefits every single athlete.
Yeah, okay.
For girls, obviously, it's vital. Seeing women in leadership roles, having visible examples of what's possible, maybe having mentors who get their experiences because they've lived them, it's huge.
And the article points out boys benefit too.
Absolutely. They benefit from seeing women leading confidently, leading effectively. They learn different ways to communicate, different ways to build trust and connection. It broadens their own understanding of what leadership looks like, maybe beyond narrower stereotypes.
So the source isn't saying male coaches aren't valuable, just to be clear.
Not at all. They emphasize male coaches bring immense value. They're absolutely essential. But the article's point is when coaching staffs are overwhelmingly or even entirely male, all the athletes on that team miss out.
Right.
They miss learning from that broader spectrum of leadership styles, perspectives, and just lived experiences.
And does the research they mentioned back up the idea that diverse teams actually do better?
Yes, they cite some research, including studies by Cook and Glass and Burton, indicating that teams and organizations with more gender-diverse leadership tend to perform better overall. They report higher satisfaction levels, they create more inclusive environments. The basic idea is that a diverse coaching team working together is just better equipped to coach and develop a diverse group of young athletes. Simple as that.
So what are some of the hurdles? What's keeping female coaches out or maybe pushing them to leave, according to the article?
They list several common things. Navigating family responsibilities alongside those demanding coaching schedules, a real lack of accessible mentorship, often lower pay compared to male counterparts, and sometimes just that isolating feeling of being the only one, the only woman on staff, or maybe even in the whole league.
So what's the key shift the source calls for here? How do we address this?
Intentionality. Being really deliberate about recruiting, hiring, and then actively supporting female coaches. Creating mentorship programs specifically for women in coaching. Developing pathways and support systems that truly value the unique strengths and experiences that both male and female coaches bring to the table. The argument is basically that young athletes deserve leadership that mirrors the diversity of the world they actually live in. It helps prepare them to lead in that diverse world themselves.
So bringing it all together then, what's the sort of ultimate conclusion from this source? Where do they leave us?
They really position youth sports at this critical point, like a crossroads. These 5 challenges we've walked through, early specialization, adultification, the coach training gaps, the mental strain, the gender gap in coaching, they aren't just problems to complain about.
Right.
As we've discussed, the article argues they are signals, clear signals, reasons for us, the adults involved, to actually take action, not just panic.
And the call to action is really for a different kind of leadership.
Exactly. Leadership that's fundamentally rooted in athlete development and human growth, prioritizing the experience, the play, the passion, just as much, maybe even more than the immediate wins or the trophies.
Which really circles back to us, doesn't it? To the listener. Whether you're a coach, a parent, running a league, or just someone who cares about kids in sports.
Yeah, we have a real opportunity here, the article suggests, to actively model a better way, to insist that training is genuinely age-appropriate, to work to bring diverse voices onto coaching staffs, to make mental and emotional well-being non-negotiable, and maybe most importantly, to consciously work to bring that simple, essential fun back into the game for the kids themselves.
The source leaves us with a pretty thought-provoking question at the end.
They really do. They challenge us to stop asking, what do kids need to change or do differently to keep up with how things are now? And instead, start asking, what do we, the adults, need to change about the system to keep kids in the game? And crucially, keep them loving it.
And ultimately, they suggest the real win, the real victory, isn't found on the scoreboard or in the trophy case at all.
No. The article argues the true measure of success for youth sports. It's whether a child grows up genuinely believing in themselves, feeling confident, feeling capable because of the positive experience they had playing that sport. That, they say, should be the standard we're all aiming for.